So we're going to make this interactive, so if you think I'm saying something that you don't agree with, or you don't like, or you have a question about, just jump in. The last 250 years, we've been running an experiment. The human race has been running an experiment of which social economical system works and which don't. You know, before 250 years ago, nothing happened, right? Everybody was basically a subsistence farmer, making their own food, barely surviving, living the rough life, dying by the age of 35. Life was not good. About 250 years ago, and if you look, there's a graph, there's a famous graph. How do you get this up? Voice.
No, this is on the desk.
What I should do? You might want to put up the lights too now that that's...
The top button.
Yeah, the top button turns everything on.
Okay. There's a famous graph of wealth per capita, human wealth per capita, right? Average wealth per capita. And if you start the graph at, I don't know, minus 20, whatever standard you want to use, it doesn't matter. This is 0, this is 17, let's use 1776, easy date to remember, the founding of the US, right? Mm-hmm. Average wealth per capita was basically flat. I mean, a little bit upwards, but it was basically flat. And people have done, I mean, it's hard to estimate, right? What does wealth even mean 20,000 years ago? How do you measure it? But something happens. It's not exactly 1776, but around this time, something happens and it goes like this. And we've been running an experiment during these years on what causes this, what drives this, and what doesn't. And the experiment is pretty, you know, the outcome of the experiment is pretty unequivocal. That is, that some societies experience this, and other societies are, you know, are doing this, or doing that, so, you know, some variation of it. Okay. So what generates this? And it turns out that what generates it, if you look across time, if you look across geographies, what generates this massive accumulation of wealth in the hands of individuals is freedom, economic freedom, capitalism. And we've run really interesting experiments, right? We tried communism because we didn't quite believe that capitalism was a good thing, and we'll see why we didn't believe it. So we tried communism, and we know how that turned out. I mean, they didn't build the wall between East and West Berlin to prevent the Westerners from rushing to embrace communism, right? They built it to prevent the East Europeans from rushing to embrace capitalism, right? To the extent that Germany, West Germany, was even capitalist. You know, one of my favorite examples of this is Hong Kong. I don't know if any of you have been to Hong Kong. Anybody been to Hong Kong? Yeah, that's great. You see, those of you who haven't maybe seen pictures. Hong Kong is basically, it's like an island, right? And it's a rock. There's nothing there. Right? And if you go back 80 years, there was a little fishing village there. There's nothing. There's no natural resources. There's nothing on this rock. And yet, over the last 70 years, people have swarmed into it. Today the population is several millions on this tiny little place, skyscrapers. It's one of the most dramatic, impressive, energetic, dynamic cities in the world. And why did they go there? What is unique about this rock? Again, there are no natural resources. You're not going to get gold there. You're not going to drill for anything. So what were they doing? You know, some of them swam there. I mean, they didn't literally swim, but they went on little, you know, little boats. They did anything they could from all over Asia to get to this rock. What is it that drove them to the rock? There was no wealth there, right? There was just a rock. What drove them to the rock was freedom. Freedom to create wealth. And wealth started to be created, so other people came. And they came there with nothing. They came with nothing, and they had no safety net. No welfare, no guaranteed health care, no Social Security, no any of the welfare state. None of that existed, and even today, under Chinese rule, none of that exists in Hong Kong. People came there because they were given a chance to just do what they wanted to do. You know, work, make a living, but keep it, because taxes were unbelievably low, still are, really, really low. You know that there's an economic freedom index that's put out every year that ranks countries based on how economically free they are, not politically free, but just economically free. And number 1 and 2 have been for many years Hong Kong and Singapore. The United States used to be number 3. Over the last 10 years, anybody want to guess where the United States has gone?
Well,
It's 10, you're close, and it's heading towards 15, 16. It's probably going to be 15, 16 in the next survey that comes out. So it's heading way down on the list. Denmark, for example, today and Canada are more economically free than the United States is. So there's a big shift going on right now on this list. But Singapore and Hong Kong are way up here, and there's no accident that per capita income in Hong Kong and Singapore, they experienced this much later. They experienced it here, and it just shot up. Right? So we've seen over the last 250 years the extent to which you embrace capitalist principles, which means private property, no government regulations, low taxes, government that does very little, is the extent to which you create wealth. America in the 19th century, GDP growth was similar to GDP growth in China right now. The difference is that China is benefiting from what? Why can China grow so much so fast today? What is it that they get that the United States and Europe couldn't have in the 19th century?
Globalization?
Yeah, but what is it about globalization that's helping them grow at the rate that they are growing today?
Outsourcing?
Yeah, experts, right? So we've already done it once, right? So we've created human capital, this incredible human capital, experts like you guys, right? Who know this stuff, who know how to run businesses, who know how to build factories, who know how to do import-export, who know how to do the technology. So they don't have to invent Intel. Intel just builds a plant over there, right? And then they steal the IP and they do it themselves. But, right? So they don't have to invent anything. And then, so that's one, human capital. What else don't they have to create? Because it comes from outside. Actual capital, money, wealth, and the ability to build stuff. So what's happening in China today is the huge benefit of the fact that the West has already created all this stuff, and they're benefiting from it. But then think back to the 19th century. The United States and Great Britain had nothing. An agrarian society, and yet they had to create it all from nothing. They had to invent the machines, ultimately the computers. They had to invent the concept of a factory. I mean, Henry Ford only invents an assembly line, right, in the 1920s. That's how late it, so this all has to, somebody has to invent it, right? So they had to create the human capital and the actual real capital. So the fact that they could grow at rates that are equivalent to China today for long stretches of time during that period is just astounding. And it's a testament to the freedom that they had. It's a testament to the power of capitalism. I would argue that the reason the United States and Europe, particularly Europe, but the United States are not growing today is because what? What has America done over the last 100 years? It's moved away from capitalism. It's abandoned capitalism. It's abandoned freedom. And you can see, you can see it in the number of laws that regulate business. You can see it in the size of taxes. You can see it just in the sheer size of government. So in the 19th century, all government spending in the U.S., federal, state, local, so at all levels of government, was 5% of GDP. 5% of GDP. Anybody want to guess what it is today?
34
It's 45.
in the US?
Yes. So the federal government is right now about 24%. But then you've got state governments, and then you've got local governments where taxes have increased. So total is between 40 and 45. Right? Sweden, by the way, is around 50. So people say, oh, the wonderful Swedish socialism. The United States not that far from them, right? There's not that big of a difference.
Question.
Yes.
But does that necessarily go hand in hand with socialism?
Well, only socialism in the sense, and we all have a different understanding of what socialism is, but only socialism in the sense of, I'd say maybe a more accurate description would be statism. So the intervention of the state in the economy, right? So it could take the form of more fascism. You know the difference between socialism and fascism? In socialism, the government owns the means of production. They actually run the factories. In fascism, they control the means of production. So they have the pretense of private property. They pretend there's private property, but they control the private property through regulations. So you could argue that America is more fascist than it is socialist, but both are basically statists. So you're seeing an increase in statism. So what we've run over the last 250 years is an experiment. Capitalism, statism, which one creates wealth, which one doesn't. And the results are pretty clear. Yeah.
The only dependent variable was GDP?
No, GDP is not a great variable. I don't like GDP as a variable, but I think you can include standard of living. So I'm talking about right now is material wealth, right? So the creation of material wealth, standard of living, personal wealth, GDP per capita. There are a lot of variables you can use, and they all track not exactly one another, but they're close. But GDP itself is a messy variable, which I personally don't like. But for example, I'll just give you an example. GDP goes up at times of war.
But it doesn't mean that there's more welfare.
But the standard of living actually declines in times of war. So for example, a lot of people say the Great Depression in the United States ended during World War II. And to me, that is nonsense. Right? Because the standard of living during World War II in the United States actually declined, particularly if you consider that thousands of guys were being killed. Right? That's a pretty steep decline in standard of living when you die, right? By definition. But not only that, people were working to build tanks instead of working to do what? To create food, to build stuff that we... So, you guys familiar with the broken window fallacy?
Sorry?
Broken window fallacy.
No.
It's a really important fallacy in economics.
That the broken window increases the GDP?
No, it's not related. It's related to GDP, but it's not directly related. But it's transferable to the whole discussion of GDP, and it's really the refutation of Keynesian economics in a little story, right? Here's a story, and then we'll go back to, I know you had a question.
Yeah.
You'll follow?
Mm-hmm.
Here's a story, right? You go to a little kid, you give him a rock, and he throws the rock through the baker's window. And the window's smashed. And what does the baker have to do now? He has to go and find somebody who makes windows, right? The person who makes the windows has to go and buy raw material, has to hire somebody, and then they have to make this new window, and then they have to install the window. So Keynes would say, this is fantastic. We've just created economic growth. We have just created a job, right? This is stimulus. This is a great stimulus. We've just created a job. We created jobs, we bought raw material, there's economic activity, and we built the window. This is fantastic. So the conclusion is, let's go break all the windows, right? And this is the explanation of why war creates economic activity, right? We're breaking big windows during a war. Right? And this is why, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize winner in economics, the American. He's a very big economist in America. And he says, hurricanes and tornadoes are wonderful because they break windows, and that creates economic activity. Now, you're all chuckling because you're saying, wait a minute, something doesn't add up here, right? Because at the end of the day, all we have is the window, which we had before we broke it. So what have we gained? And indeed, we haven't gained anything. We're back to where we were, and we wasted resources. Because those resources could have gone to build other windows in new buildings and new stuff.
But you look at it only from the individual's perspective. From the global perspective, you generated the window repairman wealth that he can use in order to...
Yes, but where did that wealth come from? How did I pay the guy to build the window? Where did that money come from? Well, the baker had it in his bank, right? And he was going to use that money to build a new furnace, to expand his business. And now he can't, so the furnace makers lost the job. But let's say, that I'm just making that up, right? He was just going to keep it in the bank. But what does a bank do with your money? It invests it in what? In other businesses. So by giving the job to the window maker, and this is the essence of the Keynesian fallacy, you've taken a job away from somebody else. Indeed, if you think about the multiple, because this is all you're getting is the same window you had before, you're actually destroying the job. You're destroying more than you're getting. And this is the whole idea about stimulus packages in the United States right now, right? You've got 800 billion or whatever the number is to stimulate the economy. Right? Where does that money come from? Right? Where does let's assume that this 800 billion is effectively, efficiently, used, which it never is, but to create jobs, building roads or whatever it is that they're building. Where does the money come from?
From China.
From people like, well, it comes from China, but let's think about even China. What would the Chinese do with their dollars if they couldn't buy government bonds? They'd have to buy real things, which would do what? which would create economic activity, right? Because they have to buy something. They can't just sit on the dollars in China. So the money has to flow back to the U.S. It would have gone into investments of real stuff. So, so one way is to, for the Chinese, the other way is to tax me, right? So they're taking it out of my bank account and giving it to somebody else. But in my bank account, it was creating jobs as well. All you're doing is taking money from one pocket and putting it in another pocket, but in between, there are huge transaction costs, right? There's a whole government bureaucracy that's getting fed by this. So stimulus packages not only do not create jobs, they destroy jobs. And this is the broken window fallacy. And you can see that it applies to so much in economics. And if you follow the news, even here in Israel, there's still broken windows here too. You know, you'll see it used over and over again. Anytime they tell you we're doing this to create jobs, BS. It's just not true. I mean, they might think that, they might pretend that, but that's not how economics works. Yeah.
It depends where they take the who they take the money from. So the banks, for example, that you gave for investing it in new businesses, new production and everything, they also take percentage to themselves. So this is creating jobs for the bankers, but they don't add up real value, for example. So maybe if the government uses it to buy real stuff and less cost for bureaus or whatever, then this is one thing. And the other thing is, by doing progressive taxes, then you take from the rich and give to the poor. So there is also the thing about how you distribute the wealth.
Sure.
And do you refer in your studies to the way wealth is distributed?
Let me
Because
get to redistribution of wealth in a minute.
there might be Google that produces a lot of money, but it all stays in the owner's hands.
Well, we'll talk about whether it does or doesn't and what that means, even to say that. But I don't have time to teach a money and banking class right now. You should get a money and banking class because it's valuable. But banking is an incredibly productive activity. So the idea that hiring bankers doesn't add economic activity is not true. Bankers serve an incredibly crucial, in a free market now, you know, granted we don't really have a free market. In a free market, bankers are the ones who make decisions about allocation of capital. There is no more important decision in a free market than which investments you make and which investments you don't, who you give money to and who you don't. Whether, you know, there's a big debate right now in America, right, about Mitt Romney. I don't know if you've been following this about private equity, about whether private equity is a good thing or a bad thing. Private equity is a great thing. What does private equity do? It takes assets that are underutilized, or takes assets that are losing. They're losing assets. You know, my favorite example here is, imagine you're in 1920, right, Henry Ford and everything, and you're making buggies. You know what buggies are? The things behind the horses, right? That's the primary means of transportation, and you make the best buggies in the world. But you know what? You're losing money because automobiles are taking over. So what private equity comes in is they come in and they shut you down. And they take the capital that is embedded in this losing industry and take it out and put it into the car industry. Or in the 1980s in the United States, a lot of factories were shut down in the Midwest. Steel manufacturers, all kind of manufacturing plants who couldn't compete with the Japanese. In the 80s, the Japanese were going to take over the world. Now it's the Chinese. Right? So they shut down those plants. But where did the money go? Where did the capital go? Right there. To high tech. It all went to Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley couldn't exist unless you took capital from somewhere. You can't, again, money doesn't grow on trees. I know that's, you know, your mother probably told you that, and she was absolutely right. And it doesn't grow on the printing press. It needs to be created. And one of the ways to create it is to reallocate capital from bad uses to good uses. Bankers serve an important fundamental function. So when the money sits in the bank, it doesn't actually sit in the bank. It's lent out to businesses to get a return. Now what does a return symbolize? What is return? Return is a symbol for profit. But what is profit?
Added value.
Added value. Profit is a wonderful, phenomenal thing. It's a measure of how much value you've added, how much wealth you've created. And how do you create wealth? I mean, how do you add value? What does it mean to add value? How does Steve Jobs add value when he makes one of these?
Invent things.
You invent things, but where's the value added in this?
Because the sum of the products in it is more than the cost
So,
of the product.
your willingness, the amount of money you are willing to pay for one of these, because you think it'll make your life better, is greater than the amount of money that went into this, including all the marketing expenses and all the business expenses and everything else that made, and he still has what profit margin, I mean, the original iPhones had 60% profit margin, which means that you value this a lot more. We all value this a lot more. Now that's a phenomenal thing. He's created something that we value so much. He's added so much value into this that he can create 60% profit. To me, that's something to celebrate. We should all cheer when a company announces they made huge profits. We should say, that's phenomenal. That means they've added so much more to our lives. Because how do they make a profit? By selling us stuff. And why do we buy it? Because we think it'll make our lives better. She's speechless.
Yes, no, I agree with so much of that, but on the other hand, a lot of the time, I think at the same time people end up feeling trapped by that they have no choice but to pay for that, that it's not, that a lot of these things aren't optional anymore, that value isn't just something, it doesn't just have to do with willingness, but it has to do with necessity as well.
Necessities, necessities are a function of what you decide is necessary for you. I know a lot of people who still have a simple flip cell phone, right? And they don't feel that necessity. Yes, there's social pressure, there's other pressures.
In relation to iPhones, I completely agree. But in relation to things here in Israel over the past year, we've heard lots about supermarkets and about that type of a profit margin.
So the problem is that when you get away from a free market, the reason I use iPhone as an example is of all the businesses in the United States, the area in which we have the most freedom is technology. So if you look at the United States, I mean, now this relates to the financial crisis, right? Because everybody would say, I just gave this nice explanation about capitalism creates all this wealth, but what about the financial crisis? Isn't that a proof that capitalism then does that, right? And this is a story, right? If in manufacturing this, we're talking about probably 80% free market, 20% government involvement, right? There's still some regulations and controls and taxes and labor and all this stuff, but it's relatively minor. For the most part, this technology is free. If you look at the areas that failed during the financial crisis, right? What were there? There were three, right? Housing, mortgages, and banks. Right? What's unique to those three markets? They're the most regulated markets in the United States. The most, not just highly regulated. So housing is heavily regulated. Where you can build, what you can build, when you can build it. But not only that, my purchasing a house is heavily regulated. For example, in America what I do is I ask the students, how many of you rent? Most of the students rent. And then I ask, there might be some older people in the audience, and I ask them, how many of you own your home outright? You paid all the debt on it. And a few people might raise their hand, and I say, thank you. Thank you for subsidizing my mortgage. Because in America, you can deduct the interest you pay on the mortgage. Right? You can't deduct your rent from your taxes. So the government is giving you an extra incentive to buy a home whether you can afford it or not. That's just the beginning, the tip of the iceberg in terms of government involvement in housing. Then mortgages, right? Tax deductibility, but Freddie and Fannie, and there are 5 or 6 different government agencies that are there to promote home ownership, to help you buy a home whether you want to or not, right? They'll incentivize you, they'll bribe you, they'll give you really low interest rates, they'll buy all the mortgages up and repackage them. Yeah, right? And a third, so mortgages is not a free market, mortgages is heavily regulated. And then my favorite is banks, right? People think, oh my God, Wall Street, banks, this is cowboy capitalism, right? This is nuts. Do you know that every single bank in the United States is regulated by at least 5 different regulatory agencies? I could name them if you really want, but 5. Right? You know how many regulators actually have offices at J.P. Morgan? They just lost this $2 billion, which they didn't really lose, but how many regulators, government officials, sit inside J.P. Morgan helping them make decisions? Anybody want to take a guess?
10,
10, 12, 110.
But was that the situation before Black Monday as well, or just before this?
Black Monday, what do you call Black Monday?
The crisis in the 30s.
Oh, no, but we can talk about what caused the crisis in the 30s. It had nothing to do with bankers. So 110 regulators sit in the bank, right? So this is not a free market. I would say banking is, I'll give you one more example. When you start a bank in the U.S., you can start a new bank. You have to get permission from the regulators for your business plan, to submit it to government and get it authorized, for your CEO and senior management, for your board of directors, for the investors who invest in the bank. Not everybody is allowed to invest in the bank. Right? No other business in the U.S. needs any of that. I can start a business in high tech like that. I don't need permission. Right? Banking is the most regulated business in the United States. 80% of banking is government, 20% is free. So there's no accident that the financial crisis happened in the most regulated, because it's the most corrupted, it's the most distorted, it's the one where incentives don't work. Of course, bankers make money on the upside, right? They make their bonuses on the upside. What happens on the downside? They get bailed out. That's a sweet deal, by the way. You know, if you could live your life where you could get all the upside, and every time something bad happens, somebody comes in and hands you a check, it wouldn't be bad, right? I mean, it would be awful, I think, because you'd never learn. I'll think of Steve Jobs' life. I mean, you should all read Steve Jobs' biography. You know, what did he learn from his failure? I mean, the kind of lessons he learned from the fact that he was fired from Apple. Right? I mean, failure is an important part of success. It's very hard to be really successful without having failed in life and learned lessons from that. So, it's not an accident that the area in where we have freedom, we get innovation, we got prices decline, we get we get profit margins that are high maybe, but we're okay with that because we see the value added. And it's not an accident, for example, in Israel, where Boaz knows more about this than I do, but where where food is controlled by government regulations, by government control, by a few families that are then in with the government in a variety of different ways, that we get upset. Sure, we should get upset at that, but we shouldn't. The solution to that is not more government involvement. The solution to that is get the government out of it so you can get an actual free market in food. Just like the solution in America for the financial crisis is not more regulations because it's regulations that caused the crisis. The solution is less regulations. The solution is create real competition. The solution is do away with too big to fail. Stop guaranteeing the downside. Create the kind of market you have in technology in banking. That's what will be, that's what will solve the problem. Now, Dodd-Frank, which is the new regulations of banking in the United States, is going to cause a bigger crisis in the future. There's no question about it. And I'll just quickly answer the question about 29. 29 was the big beginning of the Great Depression. Most economists today, and not just free market economists, but most economists today recognize that the crash of 29 was caused by bad Fed policy, by bad Federal Reserve policy. The Federal Reserve flooded the markets with money in the 1920s, suddenly decided to shut off the spigot, markets panicked, it crashed, and then they did everything in their power from 1929 until 1939. They did everything in their power to make the Depression worse. From Smoot-Hawley, which restricted trade, to to going off the gold standard, to again, you could do a whole semester just studying the Great Depression and why FDR is actually one of the worst presidents in American history, not one of the better ones. From an economic perspective, it might have been a great war president, but from an economic president, a complete disaster. So, this is the question I have. I don't think this is, I mean, there's a lot of facts involved, and I'm sure some of you might disagree with my interpretation of the fact. But I don't think this is very complex. I think most economists pretty much agree on this. Economic freedom generally works. It creates wealth. And again, I'm measuring wealth. We'll get to inequality in a little while. In terms of wealth creation, nothing matches the ability of capitalism, of freedom, of free markets to create that wealth. And indeed, the more government regulates, the more government controls, the more government intervenes, the less wealth is created. This correlation, you can see across time, you can see across geographies, you can see it across the world. It's not a cultural issue. Why is Asia so successful in the last 30, 40 years? It's because they embraced markets. They didn't embrace markets completely, but they embraced markets enough to get that engine going and create the kind of wealth. And the places that embraced it more thrive. The places that embraced it less don't thrive quite as much. And even in China, right, you can go, if you travel around China, you'll see different levels of development based on to the extent to which particular provinces, particular areas in China embraced markets or didn't. So South China near Hong Kong, they embrace markets, and you see, real flourishing. Western China is still agrarian. They never embrace freedom of markets. They're still oppressed. There's still statism. There's no wealth creation going on. So the question, the fascinating question is, if we care about per capita GDP as a measure of wealth, and we could argue about other measures of wealth, we care about standard of living, quality of life, and look, this is about quality of life. And even among the poor, and we'll put aside the differences, but the poor in the United States, I don't know how traveled you guys are, but I was in Cambodia a few years ago, and did some, took a car and drove out into the countryside in Cambodia, where they don't have electricity, they don't have running water. They have televisions with no electricity. They run the televisions with car batteries. And there's a service, here's capitalism for you, there's a service that collects all the car batteries, charges them, and then brings it back to everybody, and they can play their televisions again, right, on car batteries. No running water, they flood, right, they have floods because they don't have dams, they don't have the technology that regulates water. So their houses are built on, on stilts, so that when the flood comes, they're above the flood. And some of them are actually built on boats, so that the boat just rises when the water comes and it's anchored into the ground. That's poverty. Nobody in America is that poor. So even, and yet, 200 years ago, everybody was that poor. Everybody on the planet was that poor. There was no wealth 200 years ago. The poor was 90+% of the population.
I think that the definition was poor to be
It's irrelative.
begin with. It's irrelative and it's problematic.
Yes.
Because poor is always in relation to something.
Yes.
So
So the point is this.
Always there will be people that are poor.
Yes.
But they're
But the
less
question is,
poor
what
than-
does that mean? And the question is, what does that mean in the context of human life? Because the standard is human life, right? So the quality of human life. So if you look at the quality of human life 200, before the Industrial Revolution, here, anytime here, doesn't really matter. What's life like, right? Life's short. What's the average life expectancy when you're born? 35, right? 35. You're not expected to be dead a long time, right? How many children actually survive to age 10? Less than half. What do children do? Do they go to school?
Work.
No, they all work from early morning till late at night. They're working on the farm, raising vegetables and whatever it is that they're doing, right? What did Hobbes call life? Short, brutish, and something, ugly, nasty. Yeah, short, brutish, and nasty. That was life. Right? And everybody, other than a few aristocrats, how did they get their wealth? How did aristocrats get their wealth? Yeah, they stole it, right? They stole it. This is why this is flat, because there's no wealth creation. Nobody's creating anything. They're just reallocating, right? Talk about redistribution. All the aristocrats are doing is redistributing wealth towards them, but they're not creating anything. There's no value being created. That's this flatness. That's poor. To me, that's poverty, right? Because you're not living. Today's poor in the United States, yes, they're poor relative to everybody else. But they have automobiles, they have television sets, almost nobody, I think that the statistics about 90+% of the poor in the United States have a lot of the things that 40 years ago only the middle class had. Right? So relative to Cambodia, there's no poverty. So when this happens, everybody is better off. It doesn't mean that they're equally better off. They're not. Some people are much richer than other people. But everybody is better off. Everybody in Europe and the United States today is better off for capitalism, because of capitalism, because whatever freedom we created somewhere around here, for that freedom having
And the
existed.
flat line was not caused by communism or socialism, it was just technology changing. Right?
No, it wasn't. It was. Why wasn't technology changing? Where does technology come from?
Education.
Innovation. But where does innovation come from?
Freedom to create. Do whatever you want.
Education, freedom.
So it's freedom. You think these people were motivated? And there was some technology, right? Somebody invented the spear to hunt, right? And there somebody invented agriculture, because I didn't invent it. And there somebody invented how to build a hut rather than live in a cave or whatever. So there's some innovation, but it's relatively small. But what actually makes innovation possible? What happens in the 18th century to make innovation possible? There are two things that happen. There's didn't know this was going to be a history lesson, but there are two big trends, not global trends, Western culture trends that intersect during that period.
Industrial revolution.
Yeah, but they help, those two things create the Industrial Revolution. What are they?
Enlightenment.
The what?
French Revolution?
No, before the French Revolution
The
happened.
Enlightenment?
The French Revolution actually kills a lot of people, doesn't create anything. The Enlightenment, but what is the Enlightenment about? What is the product of the Enlightenment? Respect for what?
Knowledge.
Knowledge. And what do they call the Enlightenment? What's another word? What's another name for the Enlightenment? The age of? What's the word? The age of reason. So two things happen in the 18th century. One, a huge respect for reason, huge respect for the human mind, the understanding that all values ultimately come from here. It's not mystical revelation. That's, I mean, during most of this period, we think we're just gonna, the truth is just gonna shine onto us. We're just gonna get it somehow. It's just gonna absorb it. Well, you know, this is a very platonic, if you know anything about philosophy, this is a very platonic period, right? Science is meaningless. There is no science here because it's meaningless, right? Knowledge comes from, bam, it just hits you. Okay? During the 18th century, suddenly we discover the scientific method. There's science, and where does that come from? It comes from respect for the human mind. So that's one thing that happened. What's the second thing that happens during this period? And 1776 is key for that. The value of the individual. The value of the individual. Who does your life belong to during this period? Who does your life belong to? The king, the tribe, the pope, you know, somebody other than you, right? It belongs to the community. You're just a cog in the machine, right? Nobody cares about your life. And indeed, violence during this period, I don't know if you've ever seen statistics about violence, but you know, this is just an aside, we live in the most peaceful era in human history. I know it's hard to believe in Israel, but it's true. The last 70 years are by far the most peaceful in terms of murder, in terms of rape, in terms of torture, in terms of deaths in warfare. There's never been per capita a more peaceful period than today. This was incredibly violent because in a zero-sum world, where no wealth is being created, just redistributed, you're going to fight for what's yours. So, violence, this is a horrible period of time. Here suddenly, individual life matters. So this combination of individualism and reason combined create the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution. These are not accidents. These come out of the Renaissance and ultimately the Enlightenment. The discovery of individual rights. Anybody know who makes the discovery of the idea of rights, of individual rights? John Locke in the early part of the 18th century. And of course the founders of America are building their constitution on John Locke's work. So this is the question, right? So the question is, if capitalism works, if government intervention has been proved, and I know I haven't really proved this, I'm just giving you an outline, but just take my word for it. Has been proved time and time again that capitalism actually creates the goods. From a material perspective, again, there's no question that freedom actually creates the goods. And that government intervention destroys. Again, from a material perspective. And regulations do not create wealth. They destroy wealth. They slow things down. They make things more cumbersome. Industries that are free flourish, and there's innovation, and there's competition, there's all these things. Industries that are not free stagnate and get worse. If that's true, I'll let you ask a question. If that's true, then why is it that the whole world is basically giving up on capitalism, other than Asia, is giving up on capitalism and moving away from it and adopting more and more and more state intervention? Call it socialism, call it fascism, call it statism, call it whatever you want, social democracy. But we're moving systematically away from free markets towards more government intervention. And now I'll ask no follow-up.
Well, you were talking about wealth,
Yes.
and it relates to what Tamar said. You weren't talking yet about gaps between the high level
Okay.
society and
So I was going to wait to deal with that, but let's deal with
but
it.
you're asking why people are getting away from capitalism,
Yeah.
and you're not regarding in any way to the psychology.
The gaps.
Right, the gaps and the happiness of people, and
Okay,
which
so
actually generates to the wealth. And another thing that I want to ask you about.
well, let me do that and then ask me another.
Just
Okay.
no, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Wow.
No, I just
Oh,
have
that's
another
okay.
question.
Good.
I wrote that.
You see, I can't
you were
remember
talking-
two questions, so can I answer one and then you
Okay.
can answer the second one?
Every good thing. No, because it relates to each other.
Yeah, go ahead.
Every good thing needs boundaries. I mean, even terms like pluralism, which is a good thing, needs boundaries. And you're talking about complete freedom and
Yes.
no regulation. So, how do you see the boundaries?
So let me get to this question. Let me answer question one, and then we'll get to question two.
Okay.
And to some extent, I'm going to answer both of them in a little bit. Where do you think the greatest inequality exists? Under which political system? So let's take a few of them. Let's take communism. Under one extreme, right? Complete free markets, no boundaries. So complete capitalism. and then all the different mixtures in between. Where do you think the greatest inequality exists? Well, in the communes, right? Because everybody's poor, and a few people have a huge amount. Just ask the dictators of communism in their private planes and their huge mansions and so on, and most people are starving, right?
And if there's also a psychological element of how good is your life, because in communism you can work 10 times
Yes.
as hard.
I'm not even getting to the psychological issues, but absolutely. And then what do you get?
We're talking about life quality.
Quality
and
of
this
life.
is,
So here the inequality is greatest. Where do you think the inequality is least?
Probably in the middle.
So,
Like in countries like Scandinavia where you
okay,
have
so like Sweden.
free market, yeah,
Mhm.
but regulation.
So, it's true. Inequality in countries like Sweden is probably, there's probably a certain balance that they achieve. I'd argue it's momentary. They achieve it, but even in Sweden, anybody know who the richest people in Sweden at least used to be when Sweden was more socialist than it is today? No. The richest people in Sweden back then, this is like the 70s and the 80s, were ABBA. Remember ABBA? Singing group. They were the richest people in Sweden. And Yaron Brook, the tennis player. And of course, what did they do? They left Sweden and they moved to Luxembourg because they didn't want to pay 80% marginal income tax on their wealth. But yes, Sweden has a relatively balance. But what happened to Sweden? Anybody know what happened to Sweden? So Sweden was running a very socialist, huge redistribution of wealth system through the 1980s and into the 1990s. And they basically, what happened to them is what's happening in Greece right now. They were going bankrupt. They couldn't afford it. They couldn't pay for it. The Johan Bogs and the Abbas were leaving the country because they weren't willing to pay those kind of taxes. And what has happened over the last 10 years in Sweden? Massive deregulation, lowering of taxes, less redistribution, to the point where the difference between Sweden, and I'd say the US is somewhere here, right? It's not quite there, it's somewhere here. And Hong Kong is there, and there's still quite a bit of gap even between Hong Kong and what I believe are free markets, right? There's very little difference between these two anymore. There's very little difference between these two. But my question is, why do we care about redistribution of wealth? Why do we care? So this is the question that they asked in a survey in the United States. They asked people, what would you prefer, option A or option B, right? Two options. Option A, you get $100 and your neighbor gets $10,000. Option B, you get $10 and your neighbor gets $10. Which option do you prefer?
The thing is that...
No, I'm asking you, which option do you prefer? Well, hopefully you're all MBA students and you prefer option A. You're better off. Why do you care how much your neighbor gets? You're better off, right? I would argue that this system, yeah, it creates inequality of wealth, absolutely. Wonderful. That's great. But the fact is the poor are better off here than they are anyway here, and we could question whether they're better off or not than they. Because that goes to the non-economic dimension. Because I believe that a key to human happiness is self-esteem. You cannot be a happy human being unless you have self-esteem. How do you get your self-esteem? What? That's not true?
No, I think that especially would contradict what you said before. I think happiness especially and self-esteem go hand in hand, and this ties into the concept of poverty. And if you're saying that people, let's take the U.S. for an example, that it's not as bad to be as poor in the U.S. as it is to be poor in Cambodia. Technically speaking, absolutely right, 100%. I'm going to be healthier being poor in the U.S. than I'm going to be being poor in Cambodia. I'm going to have better access to basic necessities in the U.S. than I'm going to be in Cambodia. But as somebody in the U.S., poverty affects you in a very different way. Self-esteem does not go hand in hand with poverty in the U.S.
So let me keep on this thought, right? What gives you self-esteem in life? Where does self-esteem come from?
Many places.
No, I think there's a basic principle.
Accomplishment, success,
Wonderful.
achievements.
This
Yes.
translate to.
So self-esteem comes from you accomplishing something.
Right.
In a sense, you patting yourself on the back, right? Recognizing your own accomplishments.
Mhm.
And this is not a relative term. In my view, this is not about accomplishing relative to other people. It's accomplishment relative to the goals that you set for yourself.
But who doesn't set goals relative to others?
Healthy people don't.
Well,
Healthy people set goals relative to themselves and not relative to others because they realize that they live their own lives, they don't live other people's lives. But let me finish the thought. The problem with poverty and self-esteem in the United States, I agree with you today, but I don't agree with you 50, 60, 70 years ago, even during the Great Depression. I think the poor had great self-esteem back then. You know why? Because they worked for whatever they earned. A friend of mine who became the CEO of one of the largest banks in the United States tells the story of his grandfather. His grandfather was a bricklayer. And he says grandfather knew that he would never become wealthy. But he also knew that he took care of his family. He made enough money to take care of the family, to put food on the table, to send them to school, and he was a bricklayer. And he took pride in his bricklaying. And he had achievements in his bricklaying. And he set goals with regard to his bricklaying. And he set goals with regard to his family. And when he achieved those goals, he got self-esteem. And he was a happy person, a poor person, but happy. The problem with redistribution of wealth, which is a much bigger problem than economic problems. The redistribution of wealth is a disastrous economic issue. We can talk about that. The bigger issue is a self-esteem issue. The real problem of redistribution of wealth is it creates a whole class of people who will never have self-esteem, ever. Because they know, whether they know explicitly or deep down, that they haven't earned it, that they haven't done anything, that they haven't achieved, that they haven't set goals, they're being taken care of by somebody else's work. And that is the real destroyer of self-esteem. And if you look, for example, you should read Thomas Sowell in the U.S., Thomas Sowell's work on black communities in the United States. And how destructive welfare has been to those communities. Because what welfare does, what redistribution of wealth does, is institutionalize people into poverty. It tells them, you can't make a living, you can't be the bricklayer who works hard and actually gets somewhere. You're always going to be poor, and therefore you're always going to depend on somebody else for your living. Nothing destroys self-esteem more than that.
Don't you think it's because of lack of opportunities
No.
that the wealth people don't give the poor? For example, the Obdeko Blanc thing, which is caused because people want to maximize profit, as you were saying,
Which is great.
and it has to come from somewhere, right? And usually it comes from the people that you can
No, but
take
you
your
see,
wealth.
you're
So
thinking,
people work really hard today. Lots of people work
Yes.
really hard today, and they will continue to work hard, but they don't manage to get their wealth. And
yes.
they are very frustrated, and they don't have self-esteem, not because they don't work hard, because they don't have the opportunity to work hard.
So
And they
again,
don't have the opportunity
can't
to work
do
hard.
it.
don't mix Israel today
Right.
with free markets. Because Israel today is not a free market. First of all, it's not a zero-sum world. Somebody's profit doesn't come, this is not Marxism. Marxism is not true. Your profit are not at anybody's expense. Your profit you create. In a free market, you earn your value in the marketplace. And you have a value and you own it. When capitalism is allowed to work, when free markets actually exist, in Hong Kong, in the United States in the 19th century, more jobs are created by a lot than people to fill those jobs, than people exist to fill them. And think about the United States. It absorbed millions of immigrants during the late 19th century. Ignorant immigrants. Immigrants that had no education, brought no human capital, whether they were Jews or Poles or just to be politically correct, Irish or Italian. They were all equally ignorant and equally, they were viewed as just like the Mexicans are viewed today, right? Horrible immigrants. And yet they all got jobs. Why did they get jobs? Because the economy was free to create them. And when people make profits, what do they do with those profits? They bury them in the backyard. What do they do with the profits? They invest them. And what do those investments do? What's that? And who builds the yacht? Now, who consumes more? So consumption, right, it's kind of an end game. You eat ice cream and it's gone. Who consumes more of their income? Poor people or rich people?
Poor.
Many people. So what do the rich people do with the rest of it after they bought the yacht, which is a fraction? They invested. And then as investment do what?
Build something.
They build something. They create more jobs. I mean, where do jobs come from? Jobs come from the investments that the rich make. There is no jobs that come from anywhere else. All jobs are the product of savings. And who saves the most? Rich people. Therefore, most jobs are created by rich people. Governments don't create jobs.
But what is the value of a job if the salary that it pays is
Again,
not enough to...
but that is uniquely Israeli because, for example, why can't you buy a cheap apartment in Israel?
They don't.
Because the market doesn't work? No, why? Why can't you buy it? Why don't they build more apartments? Because there's so much demand. Why don't they build more apartments? Who controls the land? The government controls the land. If the government freed up the land, would contractors build more buildings? Of course they would. Think about a competitive model. Think about the marginal contract and what he's going to do. He's going to build and build and build. And what's the profit margin going to be for builders in a free market if the land was all available? What would happen to the profit margin? It would be driven down, right? Because it would be massive competition. What would happen to the price of apartments? It would go down. So who's keeping us all in poverty in Israel? The government is. It has nothing to do with free markets. In free markets, the land would be available, people would be buying and selling it, and they would be building. And all of us would have relatively cheap apartments.
So I have a question.
Yeah.
When you say, it sounds very simple.
It is.
So why
Okay, so this is the question I was asking before, and I was afraid we'd never get to the answer. And this is the more controversial. Until now, I haven't been controversial, so now I'm going to shift to my more controversial stuff. Because my explanation for this is not conventional. Because I think economics is simple. I really do think it's simple. I don't think this is complicated. I think it works. I think there's something much deeper going on. And we've hit on it a little bit here with the question of inequality. What are markets about? When we go to the marketplace, so, you know, always let's use my iPhone. When Steve Jobs creates this, why does he do it? Does he wake up every morning and think, I want to maximize social well-being. I want to maximize the communities. What is
I want
that?
to be rich.
Yeah, I want to be rich. Yes. So I want to make a lot of money, but it's not just about money, right? You have a passion about it.
I want to see it happen.
Yeah, I want to see a vision of mine created in this. So you could characterize Steve Jobs as being what? Well, what would you call him? He's being
Greedy.
greedy. let's use a less inflammatory word. He's self-interested.
Okay.
He's about Steve Jobs' vision, Steve Jobs' money. He's being self-interested. Now, you know, I of course went out and bought one of the first iPhones in 2008, and when I went to the mall to buy my iPhone, I did it because, if you remember, in 2008 the economy was really declining, so I went to buy the iPhone to stimulate the economy.
Wow.
Right? Right? That's why you guys go up to the mall. You guys buy stuff because you care about your fellow man, and you want to provide jobs, and you want to stimulate the economy, right? So why do you buy your stuff in the mall?
Because we're
Self-interest. Self-interest, right? The marketplace is all about one thing, and it's self-interest. Everybody's self-interest. Producer self-interest, consumer self-interest, employee self-interest, capitalist self-interest. Everybody is in the marketplace, and this, if you go to any market, you go to the fruit market, and they're shouting and they're negotiating. Everybody's trying to get a bargain for whom? For the greater good? No. And this Adam Smith, right? Adam Smith, you know when he wrote Wealth of Nations? Easy one to remember. 1776. Two great events happened. The United States was founded, and Adam Smith wrote his book, right, on capitalism. Adam Smith says in the book, he says the baker bakes his bread, not because he cares about you, because he's trying to make a living, because he cares about himself. And he makes the bread good because he thinks you'll pay more for better bread. The truck driver, he didn't use trucks, but, you know, the delivery guy who delivers the bread to the grocery store, he doesn't care about you. He's trying to make a living. He doesn't care about the grocer. He doesn't care about the baker. Right? Everybody in the chain only cares about whom? Themselves. And because they care about themselves, they treat you like shit, right? They treat you really badly. Is that true? Apple does that? They don't care about you? No. Because they want you to keep coming back. So they treat you nicely, not because they like you. They are indifferent to you. They treat you nicely because that is what's required in this competitive marketplace to get you back into the store to buy more stuff. So capitalism is the system of self-interest. That's what capitalism is. Don't let anybody tell you anything. And I know if you take a business ethics class, I don't know about here, but anywhere else, they'll tell you capitalism, no, it's all this social utility and stakeholder wealth. Nobody cares about any of that. Even when they talk about it, they're really talking about it in order to use it as a marketing gimmick to make more money. Right? Capitalism is, let me finish. Capitalism is about self-interest. Now, from an ethical, moral perspective, I'm going to shift this to philosophy a little bit. What do we think about self-interest? So I know I grew up in a good Jewish household, right? And my mother taught me when I was very little, what? Think of yourself last. Think of others first. What is nobility? What is virtue? What is the good?
Putting others before yourself.
Yeah, sacrifice, right? I like to describe Bill Gates, right? Bill Gates made billions of dollars running Microsoft. And when he was making all that money in the 1980s and 1990s, what would we think of him? Not as a businessman. A lot of people admired him as a businessman. But as a moral figure, from an ethical perspective, what do we think of him? Or pretty bad, right? Greedy bastard, right? Nobody thought of him. Nobody, I mean, Mother Teresa over here, where's Bill Gates? Right? Somewhere way down here, right? Now, he quits Microsoft, and he's got $50 gazillion, and he puts it in a foundation. What do we think of him morally? Now he's a good guy, right? He's giving it all away. Now, where do you think he did more good for the world? Let's think about the world. Where do you think he did more good for the world? When he was running Microsoft or in his foundation?
Microsoft.
No question. No question. We can run the numbers one day, right? When he dies, we can do the weighting, and he did a lot more good for the world running Microsoft. You know why I can tell that? Because that's how he got rich. By doing good to us. Because we bought his stuff. Why? Because it made our lives better. And millions and millions and millions and millions of people's lives became better by buying Microsoft products. And not only that, we all interconnected. Because we all were using the same products, which made the internet possible. And the internet has changed everybody's life. Even poor people's lives are better off for Microsoft existing, much more than anything it'll do as a foundation. Yet, we have a moral code in Israel, in America, and the West generally, that says making money, giving it away, wow, that's great. And I've actually promised Bill Gates sainthood. You know, the Pope will give him sainthood. But he has to do one thing. What do you think he has to do to achieve sainthood? How does he become Mother Teresa-like? Because she's a saint. He has to give it all away, move into a tent, right? And if he could bleed a little bit, right? Show some blood, show some suffering, I can guarantee you, like I'm saying, we have a moral code that says that goodness is measured by how much you're willing to sacrifice. And I mean by sacrifice, giving and expecting what in return? Nothing. Suffering. Sacrifice equals suffering. Sacrificing, good, virtuous, wonderful. Sacrificing, by the way, is lose-win, right? You're losing, somebody else. Making money, I'll take the word. Making money is win-win. But morally, bad. Sacrifice, good. Making, bad. Now that's upside down. Sacrifice is consistent with what system? What system demands sacrificing? Communism. Anything that statism is, you know, we want to sacrifice the able to the unable. I mean, that's the whole principle of redistribution of wealth is a Marxist principle. Take from the able, give to those who are not able, right? From those with ability to those who need, right? Need is the standard of morality. So, our moral code is consistent with this. And yet we want this, we're never going to get this. What do we think? If I say you're selfish, what do we think? You're self-interested, what do we think? Ooh, bad person. There's something wrong. I'll get to that. She was first.
Under this model, you're looking at popularity and demand. What do you do with, for instance, the tobacco industry? Where if it's very popular, it's making profits, is that great?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is great. Because whatever your value judgments might be about cigarette smokers, it's none of your business. If they want to smoke, and they want to ruin their lives, and they want to destroy their lives, that's their business. Now, I don't want to smoke. I don't want to have smokers around me. I would make my home and my restaurant and my hotel and my office building smoke-free. But if other people want to smoke, if other people want to be around smokers, if other people want to interact with smokers, why is it any of my business? So, you know, so my view is it's your life is your individual responsibility. It's not my responsibility to manage how you run your life. Now, you have a problem when healthcare is provided publicly, right? Now I want to care. Now I care about how you run your life. Right? If I'm paying for your healthcare, I want you to stop smoking. I want you to stop drinking sugary drinks. That's the new regulation in New York, right? Is to limit. I want to stop you sugar, but I want you to exercise. I'm going to have exercise police, and I'm going to come out and I'm going to check that you exercise 2 hours a year because I'm paying for your healthcare if you don't exercise. And by the way, you shouldn't eat a lot of whatever, right? That's where, once you care about other people's well-being, once you're paying for their well-being, you're gonna start caring, and you're gonna start intervening, and you're gonna start controlling their lives. And that's how you move from here very rapidly in that direction.
So I want to go back. Basically, you said that you think that there's no room for a government intervention, and that there shouldn't be any regulation.
You don't want to talk about morality, you want to get back to economics. Okay.
I want to go back to economics. So my question is, I don't know how well you can reflect what I'm saying now to other countries, but I have to consider Israel because we're living here. And I think that since Israel is a very tiny country, there's no other way, like there's the tycoons problem today. I think that if there wasn't any governmental regulation that enforces imports and enforce it like the cellular industry, now that they enforce the cellular companies to enter the market. I think that we were, specifically in our setting, we in some cases will be worse without government regulation.
So without knowing the specifics of the cellular business, because I don't know the
I
specifics.
can give you specific if you like.
Yeah, Boris knows the specifics and he can give it to you after. I don't buy that at all. I think this model doesn't depend on size. And many of the restrictions that government places are to protect those people, right? They're to protect their problems. I mean, we heard an example earlier today of what was the imports.
Yeah, it was about cement import.
Yeah, cement imports. The huge imports of cement. This is another reason why the cost of housing in Israel is very high. Because cement is expensive. Now it turns out that you can make cement overseas a lot cheaper, import it into Israel, and build homes with much cheaper cement and lower the cost of housing. But there are huge quotas on that, right? There are huge taxes on that to keep exports out so that we can make cement in Israel. That makes housing expensive. Who does that help? The tycoons in the cement industry.
I'm not saying that in every circumstance.
Yes, but my point is that you can't separate these out. Yes, once in a while you'll see a law that comes about that breaks up the cartel or breaks up the tycoons. But generally, most of the time, because where do politicians get their money, right? How does this system work, right? Once you get away from free markets, once politicians have power over markets, what do markets then have to do? Markets now know that let's say you guys are the politicians, I know that you guys can control my fate and my competitor's fate. If I give you a lot of money, you can kill the competitor and help me. How many politicians do you know are going to resist that? I'll give you the classical example, and I'm sorry, all my examples from the U.S.
You have the fixed price for book that just
fixed price for books right now, right?
Stimatsky law.
It's helping Stimatsky. Because Stimatsky can't compete with this new chain that is vertically integrated. Who's going to suffer? Consumers. Because what this new chain is doing is lowering the price of books. Why is that a bad thing? And if authors find a problem, why don't they negotiate higher prices? Because they're not in a power position? Well, tough. If there's competition among authors that's driving down prices. But put that aside. I was going to use an example from the U.S. about, what were we talking about?
Capitalism and politics.
Yes, capitalism. Oh, Microsoft. We're talking about Microsoft. So, but do you remember Microsoft in around 1996, 97, the American Justice Department went after Microsoft as a monopolist, right? How much money do you think Microsoft was spending before that happened on lobbying Congress, on bribing politicians?
None.
Zero. Exactly zero. All Microsoft wanted, and most of Silicon Valley in those days said, leave us alone. We're not going to give you money. Don't interfere in our business. We're going to let us create products. Let us do our thing, right? How much money do you think they spent today?
Millions.
Hundreds of millions of dollars. Actually, there was just an article about criticizing Apple for not spending enough money in Washington. The politicians are pissed off that Apple's like too good to spend money on bribing politicians. Well, of course they are, because they're making less money, right? I mean, and let's call these bribes because they are bribes. I'm a cynic about politics, but I think it's justified. You have to live among them a little bit. You have to go to, Jerusalem, Washington, just for a little while. One of the fabulous, Buzz and I were just talking about this. How come politicians, when they enter government, are pretty poor, and when they leave government, they're really rich?
Because, I don't know if you say it in English at all, but...
I mean, Ehud Barak has this magnificent...
Where do you get your facts? I mean, I don't see Shaggy much richer. For
Because
She's
example.
one, and she's so
She's
sure.
1 in a million. 1 in a million. Yes, I'm not saying all of them.
Tamam
And
gave
just
an
remember-
example about Moshe Kachlan, who is from the Likud, and he's not rich, and he's not afraid of the tycoon.
He's not rich because he's still in government. Wait until he leaves.
Ignored her example, and it's a good example.
What was the example?
About the cellular.
I'm sorry, I don't know the details, but I would guarantee that if you got into the details of how, so it's in the United States. For example, why is there less competition in cellular? You know, I would argue that it's because the government controls the spectrum. The government, instead of selling the spectrum, leases the spectrum. If they sold the spectrum and they created a real market in the spectrum for digital, there would be a real marketplace, there would be real competition. But the government controls that spectrum. It chooses who to give it to and chooses who not to give it to. And by the way, bribes don't always come in dollars. They often come in goodies, in nice trips, in just respect, in lots of ways that you might find hard to measure. But politicians are driven by power, by goodies. Yes, some of them are driven by ideology. It's a small minority. It's a very small minority of politics. On both sides, and I'm not accusing anybody in particular, on all sides of this. And again, you know, I remember politics in Israel from 25 years ago when I lived here. It was bad enough back then. No, we moved towards more capitalism in Israel than then. It was socialist back then.
And got worse, right?
In things, you want to live in Israel from 30 years ago? No, you don't. Things are so much better today in Israel than they were 30 years ago. To everybody, from the very poor to the very rich, life in Israel today, the standard of living in Israel today is way higher today than it was 30 years ago. Way higher. Employment is far greater. The stuff that you have is far better. The quality of life, every aspect of Israeli society. I mean, you guys weren't here 25, 30 years ago.
Could have bought a house.
But again,
bought groceries
who's-
out of the
Who's
salary.
caused this? Who's caused this?
Necessities, for example, are not all regulated by the government, and that's even for example, the cottage protest is because cottage is not regulated, and
It
it
is.
is highly expensive.
The milk market is one of the most regulated
But
market
I'm
in
talking
Israel.
about specific cottage.
There is the milk law in Israel.
It's not a problem.
I mean, even if
Okay.
you're right, even if
Never
even a
mind.
cottage is one product is unaffordable, so what?
It was an example.
There are alternative
It's
products
not
that you can buy instead of cottage. There's other forms of cheese where you can get your protein from. But, yeah, somebody
So
knew.
so you say like the maximum welfare is a result of free market, right? Basically.
What do you mean by welfare? I'm saying the maximum quality of life and standard of
Yeah,
living is a result of free
the
market.
freer the market, the better it is. But
Yes.
don't you agree that there are some effects of free market that actually damage the welfare? For example, external effects of firms. Like you say, a firm will try to maximize profit, but it doesn't take into account a lot of other effects it has on society, on the environment. Like in the example of the government
Yes.
giving land to everyone, of course the prices of apartments will go down, but we won't have any place left for other stuff that are also important. Maybe the environment will be damaged, and the overall welfare will decrease. So this is an example of one area where the government should intervene to increase welfare. Don't you agree?
No. But let me explain why. No, I don't. I mean, I'm consistent. If nothing else, I was accused yesterday, I did a debate yesterday night with
Yossi
Yona
from here.
of the university here on capitalism versus socialism. And he accused me of being consistent. That was his main accusation. I'm too consistent. First of all, if that's true, right, if what you said is just true, then why are you complaining? Stop complaining about high prices of apartments.
No,
Because
it's a question
there's
of how much. I'm questioning
a trade-off.
if you have a principle resistant to intervene.
I'm principled resistant to intervention. In my view, if you really take this seriously, then all property is private property. And if you do something to harm my property, either by polluting my property, by damaging my property, then we've always had plenty of legal ways in which, for example, you can't dump your garbage in my backyard, right? If I own a property of land, you can bring your garbage and dump it in my, this goes back to 1,000 years of common law. All we have to do is now expand that concept to other forms of property, right? Water, other forms of rights. There's no, private property solves most issues of pollution. Most issues of pollution are solved through private property. What's that?
There are many other effects. I would argue
there are
that
very
also,
few
that
effects.
also inequality also have effect on welfare.
Yeah, I know you do, but to me, and I'll go back to the morality in spite of the fact you guys don't want to talk about it, because I think this is the core, and I think this shapes the way you think about this. The fact is that the only reason we care about inequality is because we resent this notion of self-interest so much. We resent wealth creation. We resent self-interest. Because why do you care about inequality if the poor are less poor than they were before? Why do you care about inequality if the poor are living a good life, which I can guarantee they do under free markets? Why do you care about inequality? Why do you care about relative wealth? Shouldn't you care about the opportunities that you have? Shouldn't you care about your wealth relative to your ability rather than the, so what if somebody's richer I don't care about people being richer than me. I think it's, as I said before, I think it's wonderful that they're richer than me because the way they got rich is by selling me great products. The way they got rich is by me paying for stuff to make my life better.
You don't care unless they cancel you.
Unless they what?
מבטלים אותך.
But they don't cancel me. That's the beauty of a free market. The free market is about trading.
Sometimes people maximize profit and not just for their self-being. And
They
cancel
do
you all
just
the
for
way.
their self-being, and that's the beauty of the
That's
system.
the boundary, that's what-
Their self-interest is expressed in the trader principle. They trade. By making themselves better, they make you better.
First of all, no, I agree with this concept of self-interest. I personally am unashamedly self-interested. I don't care what other people think about it. There's a reason why I'm here. There's a reason why I'm studying this degree.
Good.
It's to go somewhere in life. However, I think that this concept, if I understand correctly, of by being productive and creating wealth and blah, 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 what this does is it kind of creates a blanket of a higher quality of life and a higher average level of life, longevity, all of these things. But this also goes against the concept of individualism. Individuals, I think, in a lot of places, in the US, for example, I think have a more difficult time finding opportunity, have a more difficult time achieving what that bricklayer you talked about earlier achieved.
Right.
Today, if I am a simple worker in the US, I might work my hands to the bones every day making minimum wage and get nowhere and not be able to afford to give my children the opportunities that you're saying will lead to my own feelings of achievement, success, happiness, and the opportunities at wealth that so many people have just because they're at a different place in society that allows them to get there faster, more easily, etc.
I agree with all of that. The question is why. Why is it that you at a very basic job cannot make a living in the United States today, cannot make that step up? And I would argue unequivocally that it's government regulation through and through that keeps those wages down. And we could go through the whole exercise.
How? So why?
How?
I'm curious.
So what is the cost of production for a businessman? So what does he have to pay for? He has to pay wages. He has to pay, by law, he has to pay benefits. What else does he have to pay?
Taxes.
What's that? Taxes. He has to pay taxes. He has, in most businesses in the United States, he has huge costs. He has just regular business costs, right? Regular business costs that he would have to pay anything. But then he has huge regulatory costs. Right? Now the market can only bear a certain price because people only, there's only so much wealth in the economy. So let's say that price is 100. And he's going to make a 10% profit. So his profit is going to be $10. And he's not going to be in this business if he can't make $10 a profit. Okay? Now he has to distribute the rest of the cost across these. Right? This is a fixed cost that's external to him. He has no control over this. And this has been going up dramatically over the last 100 years. Dramatic. Okay? His regular costs actually are probably going down because he's becoming more productive, there's more technology, there are more things, so these costs are probably going down. Taxes have been going up dramatically over the last 100 years. Remember, you know what corporate taxes were 100 years ago? Zero. By the way, just as an aside, who pays corporate taxes? Who pays corporate taxes? Corporations. Who are corporations? Who are the corporations? So think, this is an important exercise for you as businessmen. Who pays corporate taxes? Who are the people who pay it, right? Corporations are just fictitious entities. Who's everyone? Shareholders. Shareholders? Shareholders don't pay a dime of corporate taxes. Why not? They price, have you taken a finance class?
Yes.
They do a discounted present value, future cash flow, right? It's a pre-tax or post-tax when they do the cash flow. After tax. They don't care about taxes. After tax. Who pays corporate taxes? The customers do. All corporate taxes are priced into the price of the good. So when we raise corporate taxes, who are we raising taxes on? The poor, the people and the customers. So we think, oh, we're going after those rich corporations, right? This is the mythology. This is why everything we know about economics is tilted, is distorted because of self-interest. But you won't let me do it.
No.
Because you want to talk about economics. So taxes have been going up. So corporate taxes, by the way, are the stupidest, dumbest taxes I've invested. They should be zero. You want to tax rich people? Tax rich people. Don't tax corporations. Corporations just pass it on in their products. Their products are more expensive. You lower corporate taxes to zero, prices would come down in the economy. Competition would drive them down. Benefits going up and down. Up. Because they're being forced, right? More and more benefits we have to provide.
Do you look at benefits as a bad thing?
It depends. Some make sense if you negotiate for them, but a lot of this is dictated by government, not dictated by your needs as an employee, right? If it's dictated by your needs as an employee, then we can negotiate. But if it's dictated by government, they don't know what you need. Again, they talk about averages.
You can negotiate if you can negotiate for your term.
Some of them, but some of them I get benefits.
Negotiation power.
My employer gives me benefits that I don't want. I don't want them because the government forces them to give them to me. I would rather get cash. I would rather get salary. Or I would rather get different benefits, right? But the government dictates certain sets of benefits. So the cost of benefits will be going up because the cost of government is being going up. So what happens to wages? They're going to go down. In real terms. So whose fault is it? Now I know you think I'm playing a trick on you, but I'm not. This is the reality, people. What's driving up the cost is this, and this, and this. And you can squeeze him. You can say, no, only make $8. Okay, but at some point, he's not going to start the business, right? Shareholders are not going to invest unless they get the required rate of return, right? And if you can't make it in this country, then they'll take their money somewhere else where they can get the required rate of return. In America right now, all the money's going to developing countries because you can get a required rate of return in the United States right now. So, yeah, so it's going to go, so you can squeeze him to 8, but at some point you can't squeeze him because he's going to shut down the business and go away.
This has gone up tremendously. The rate of return of the dividends distributed to the owners have gone
Again, I can only speak for America, not true. In America, the dividends have been stable for 50 years. The rate of return on profit on average in industry is a pretty stable thing because competition keeps driving it down. Israel, again, Israel is full of special favors, special groups that the government has carved out and given them special favors. And yeah, you drive up, but when you drive...
Can I ask you for an example? Have you seen the movie Food Inc., for example?
Food Inc., like Incorporated.
Yeah, I've seen Food Inc. is a good example of propaganda. It's very good. It's very well done. So for example, now America's not innocent here, right? So for example, why are certain food prices going up in the United States? Because the United States is subsidizing corn, because they're subsidizing ethanol. So lots of land in the United States, instead of growing wheat and other food products, and this is affecting the entire world, is being wiped out, and they're planting corn. Why? Because the government subsidizes it. So there's no marketplace for these things. Again, what I'm describing here is a market. This is how businesses are run. You know, we can argue there's specific examples where this is different, but on average, the average firm, when you raise the regulatory cost, when you raise taxes, when you force them to pay benefits that nobody wants, what you're going to get is a lowering of wages. There's just no way around it in real terms, not in inflation adjusted, in real terms. This is why people can't afford it anymore, and this is why they could 100 years ago. This is why the bricklayer 100 years ago got self-esteem and could afford it. Let me do one other little economic exercise because it's so wonderful. Minimum wage, because minimum wage is like, oh, you can't not have minimum wage. But minimum wage does what? What happens when you set a price of a good? And what happens if a good in the marketplace would sell for 8 and you decide you're going to price fix it at 10?
Only those who have enough resources to buy it, buy it.
So, you have shortages? No. If you set it at 10, you have surpluses. You create a lot of stuff but nobody wants to buy it. What happens if you set it at 6? Everybody wants it, but nobody's going to produce it because there's no profit in it. So we know that government setting prices of stuff, I mean, they can't hit the 8, right? They're either going to hit. So what do we do with minimum wage? Minimum wage, we say, let's say in America, it's $8 an hour, right? In some places. What if you're a teenager, you're 18 years old, you just graduated from high school, and you can add value to a company at $6 an hour. That's what you can do. You're not very skilled, you're not very able. The minimum wage is $8 an hour. Am I going to employ you?
No.
If I employ you, I lose $2. I lose $2 on every transaction. So what do? I don't employ you. I build machines, I get robots, I close my business, I don't know, I do something. But it's just suicide to hire you, if you're worth 6, to hire you at 8. So what does having a minimum wage at 8 do? Creates unemployment. It creates unemployment among whom? Who gets unemployed? The weakest, the poorest, the people who most need the job, and the people who can then, if they had a job at 6, could then work themselves up to 8, to 10, to maybe one day owning a place, right? There are plenty of stories like that. But if they don't start at 6, how are they going to get the skills to get to 8? Who's going to give it to them? Welfare? The government's going to give them the skills to get from 6 to 8? No. They're going to get on the dole, and they're never going to have self-esteem. They're never going to have the opportunity to move ahead. Minimum wage is the most destructive policy for the poor ever invented. And yet every politician in the world only wants to raise it. And yet when you raise it, what happens? You get unemployment. And again, you can look country in Europe after country in Europe. The countries that have the highest minimum wage have the highest teenage unemployment. Because it's the young and the unskilled who never find a job. And who are you helping with minimum wage? You're hurting everybody. The people you're trying to help, you are destroying. And you're destroying them spiritually, even more than you're destroying them materially, because you're not giving them an opportunity to make a living, to be a bricklayer, and to build something for themselves.
So do you think that in China, when you have a lot of kids and with people working around the clock for like $1 or something, it's better for
Absolutely. Because what is the option? Why are they doing it? Why are people in China willing to work for $1 around the clock? What is the option that they have? Stop. To stop. Or to go back to the farm where they don't make $1 a day, they make 20 cents a day. Otherwise, why are they going to the city to work for $1? Their lives are better off of doing it. You might not like it because we can sit here in middle-class Israel and look over there and say, I wouldn't want that life, but it's not our choice.
Unemployed will get the benefits.
Yes, the unemployed get benefits, but by getting the benefits, you're destroying their lives. You're destroying their lives because you're taking away their ability to make a living for themselves, their ability to have self-esteem, and more than that, you have to take money from somebody in order to give them those unemployment benefits. You're not just printing, you're taking it from somebody. You're destroying productive capacity.
Right.
You're taking
who
stuff.
are working.
Oh, because I'm working, why am I penalized? And then, of course, because I have to pay taxes, right, now that I'm working, I can't afford that apartment. And that's why the middle class gets hurt, because I'm funding, I have to support all these unemployed people who are created unemployment artificially. They wouldn't be unemployed if only we did away with the minimum wage.
But the people in China that work around the clock can't support themselves completely. They don't have the quality of life as people who get social services in the U.S. or in Israel, for example.
That is true, but I bet you that they have more self-esteem than the people who get the social services in Israel and in the United States, and I bet you they're more ambitious, and I bet you that 20 years from now, they will have a higher standard of living because they've learned how to work, and they know what they're doing, and they'll advance. The ones who are more ambitious will do very, very well, whereas these people who are unemployed will never advance. They're stuck in poverty for the rest of their lives. But also, the fact is that China's where it is. If you did away with the minimum wage in Israel, it wouldn't drop to the rates of China. Because we have wealth in Israel. So people would start, I mean, this is an American example. People would work for $6 an hour. That's not a bad thing. But if you take that opportunity away from them, you're destroying their lives and you're destroying the economy. You're getting two negatives out of, and what is the reason we have a minimum wage? Because economics, again, are simple. This is not hard. This is economics 101. Why do we have a minimum wage? Because it makes us feel good. It makes us feel good. There's no rational reason for this. It makes us feel like we're helping people even though we're hurting.
Don't you think it's because people want a maximum profit, that, not people, corporation, want maximum profit, without limits,
They
right?
want a maximum profit without limits, so what they should do is chain their employees, you're gonna be managers.
They don't care about you, as you were saying. You're
Yeah, but they
right,
do.
you're selfish. They don't really care about the workers. For them, they want a maximum profit for themselves, for themselves.
So
So
you're-
what they do, they pay the minimum they can to their workers,
That's
right?
right, they do
So-
pay the minimum
So
they
that's
can
why
at the
you
worker.
have a minimum.
But what would the
wage.
workers do if they're paying less than what the worker's worth? What can the worker do?
Refuse to work.
Go and work for somebody else. There's competition for labor. You think there's no competition for labor? Of course there is.
Especially
Go
not
out
for
there into
poor.
the world, go out
Especially
there.
not for the poor.
Not
That's-
true, quite the opposite. If McDonald's is paying $7 an hour, and you're good at what you do, and you think you're producing $9, you think that who's competing with McDonald's? Burger King wouldn't pay you $7.25? And then there's Taco Bell. Taco Bell's trying to really grow right now. I'm just making this up. Taco Bell's really trying to grow right now. They're looking for the best employee possible, so they're going to pay you $8. And if you can't work for Taco Bell, there's 1,000 other employers who employ poor people who are going to compete. And if you're not, it's just like in high tech. If you're a programmer and you're not getting paid enough money, what do? You leave and you go find another company.
But
You think that
minimum wage jobs are not the skill job that you can add added value.
Doesn't matter,
You take
McDonald-
this
There are
employee or
skilled
this
workers.
employee, and it doesn't matter to the
See, you think the laws of economics only apply to skilled jobs? It's just not
I think
true.
that you have bargaining power if you have something to offer that is better from somebody else.
What you have something to offer is if you can create $8 worth of value and you're only getting paid $6, somebody will pay you $8. That's how the marketplace works. That's how the principles of economics work. And just go out there into the marketplace and you see it works every single day. Now, it doesn't work from 6 to 8 because nobody can make 6 because we banned these. These people, we've put them into poverty for the rest of their life. But if you make 8, if you're in McDonald's making 8, you develop a few skills and now you work 10, you're going to get 10. You think people make $8 for the rest of their life? No. They advance up and not in the same company. They go out and they branch out because they develop skills and now they're better at it.
I wish you were right.
No, look, this is the reality of the last 200 years. The fact is, again, that if you go back to America when it was closer to free market, people's real wages, do you know what people's real wages did from 1800 to 1850? Real wages, this part, right? After adjusted for inflation, doubled. And then from 1850 to 1900, they doubled again. These are periods where there's no minimum wage. The poor, again, all these miserable people coming from Europe who know nothing. And then from 1900 to the Great Depression, they almost double again. This is the period of the greatest. Look at Hong Kong. Hong Kong real wages increased dramatically, and everybody who comes to Hong Kong is poor. And yet they become middle class. How did they become middle class? Because of this process, because wages keep going up. The more productive you are, the more businesses pay you. And they pay you not because they care about you. They pay you because that's how they get their best workers. And if you want to maximize profits, you're all going to be managers one day. You want to maximize profits? You better pay your employees well. Because if you don't pay your employees well, even the poor employees, even the people who wash dishes, because if you don't pay them well, they won't do a good job. And if they won't do a good job, you won't be able to make maximum profits. The best policy for maximizing profits is treating your people well. That's the only reason to treat them well. I mean, other than you're a nice person, right? But because it's going to maximize profits, and they're going to leave you. They're going to leave you if they're good and you're not paying them enough. They're going to leave. So the fact is, the historical record is that when you have free markets, real wages. What have real wages in the United States done the last 30 years? They've gone up a little bit, almost nothing. Why? We have all this wonderful status and regulations, minimum wage, nothing. But when we have freedom, they doubled every 25 to 50 years, which is an astounding record. I've got 3 minutes, yes.
I would love if you could say 2 sentences about what you think about Mitt's economic policy.
Mitt Romney?
Mitt Romney.
I think he's,
We're on for same base.
So I think you've got Obama, who I think wants to move the United States dramatically to the left towards more government control, and I think you've got Mitt Romney, who wants to move it a tiny little bit towards a little bit more economic freedom. He's a middle of the road. He was the governor of Massachusetts. I think that's all you have to know about Mitt Romney. I mean, you can't become a governor of Massachusetts if you're not pretty liberal yourself. So he's not a
You
radical
don't see
free
him
market.
as right. Okay.
So I want to say a bit about the future.
Yeah.
Like this, I think this is the first time ever that I heard this kind of economical perspective.
Yeah.
did you hear, or like, are there countries that actually that are thinking about moving away from government control and going to the closest as possible to a free market?
Yeah, so we've seen,
Israel.
no,
It's not going away.
No. I think you're seeing that in Asia a little bit. You certainly saw that 20, 30, 40 years ago. The Asian tigers, this is how they became tigers. They didn't go all the way to where I'd like them to go, but they moved in this direction. Generally, the West, in the United States, Europe, Israel, I don't know, is moving that direction. And that's why, talk about the future. The future is very depressing. Europe is bankrupt. The United States is bankrupt. I mean, literally bankrupt. So the United States has all these promises. It's promised Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. If you take all those promises it's made people, the payments that'll pay them, and then you take all the taxes that it is expected to collect from those people, the gap between those two numbers makes Greece look like a field day. The gap between those two numbers is $120 trillion.
I guess my question
Yes.
will be, what are the barriers today?
To doing this?
Yes, because this is what I'm saying. You make it sound very simple.
The barriers,
Why?
you didn't let me talk about them, not you, but generally, the barriers are ethical. The barriers of our ethical code. As long as we believe that goodness means selflessness, that goodness means self-sacrifice, that goodness means giving and not creating, we will never win this. That is, we will never move. So free markets relies on our shifting our attitude towards self-interest. If we believe self-interest is a virtue, if we believe the purpose of life is to live your life, each one of you, the best life that you can live for yourself, not for other people, but for yourself, and that's a virtue, that's a good thing, then you don't want the government sitting on your shoulder telling you, don't eat that, don't do that, don't play that, don't build that. You want to be left alone, you want to be free. In order to get free markets, you first have to have individuals whose primary moral focus is their own lives. And that requires a moral, ethical revolution before you get a real revolution. Now, I'm going to give you, if you're interested, I've got business cards, and on the back of the business cards is my new book, which is coming out in September. It explains all of that. It explains all of this and all of that. So if you're interested, I'll give you one of these cards, and when it comes out in September, you can get my book, and you can fill all this in.
So I'm saying, why you're talking about
No, because it only sells right now in the U.S., so you'll have to buy from Amazon U.S. at whatever price Amazon deems. But you can get it on an ebook, so...
Are you literally talking about one business card, or...
I'll give it to anybody who wants one.
Only one for you,
Don't
not
feel
that
like
you're going
you
to
have
have
to
to
take
share.
Yeah, I'm not big on sharing. You can get
Leah, can you grab them from yourself?
Right?
Thank you. Any?
Okay.
And there's a website, and there's tons of content, and and if you go on YouTube and you put my name in, there's like 400 videos of me doing stuff like this. So don't feel like this was your last opportunity to see me in action. Thank you all. This was fun.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. רותם, אני יכול לך עוד כמה דקות?
לא צריך. כן, הרעיונות עם הספרים.
Do you want this?